In the late 19th century, America was on the brink of transformation. The Industrial Revolution had sparked unprecedented growth, and cities like Chicago were booming, with grand architectural feats rising against the skyline. But within this era of progress lurked a darkness few could have imagined. It was here, amidst the excitement of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, that one man, H.H. Holmes, built an empire of deceit and death. This is the story of America's first known serial killer, a man whose charming facade masked a chilling brutality. Herman Webster Mudgett, later known as H.H. Holmes, was born on May 16, 1861, in the small town of Gilmanton, New Hampshire. Raised in a strict and devoutly religious household, young Herman exhibited an unusual intellect from an early age. However, his curiosity took a dark turn. He became obsessed with death and the human body, often experimenting on small animals in secret. This macabre interest in anatomy and medicine followed Mudgett into adulthood. He attended the University of Michigan Medical School, where he excelled academically, but also began engaging in fraudulent activities. Using his knowledge of anatomy, Mudgett would steal cadavers, mutilate them, and then claim they were accident victims to collect on fraudulent insurance policies. This blend of cunning and cruelty would become a hallmark of his later crimes. After completing his medical degree, Mudgett adopted the alias Henry Howard Holmes, a name under which he would perpetrate his most notorious deeds. With a penchant for charm and manipulation, Holmes moved from town to town, defrauding people and leaving behind a trail of broken promises and death. By 1886, Holmes arrived in Chicago, a city ripe with opportunity and anonymity. He soon found employment at a local pharmacy in the Englewood neighborhood, but his ambition quickly outgrew his position. Through deceit and likely murder, Holmes acquired ownership of the pharmacy and the adjacent plot of land, where he would construct his most infamous creation, a 3-story building that the press would later dub the Murder Castle. The Murder Castle was no ordinary building. Holmes personally oversaw its construction, hiring and firing multiple contractors to ensure that no one fully understood its twisted design. The building was a labyrinth of hidden rooms, secret passages, soundproof chambers, and trapdoors. It was a place designed for one purpose: murder. In 1893, Chicago hosted the World's Columbian Exposition, drawing millions of visitors from around the globe. For Holmes, this was the perfect opportunity. He advertised his hotel as a convenient and affordable place to stay, particularly targeting young women who had come to the city seeking work or adventure. Many of these women would check in, but never check out. Once inside the murder castle, these victims would encounter horrors beyond comprehension. Some were asphyxiated in sealed rooms with gas jets. Others were trapped in airtight vaults to die slowly. Holmes's fascination with the human body extended beyond death. He conducted grotesque experiments on some of his victims, dismembering them and selling their skeletons to medical schools. Holmes's methods were methodical and detached, but his primary motivation was profit. He would strip his victims of their belongings, forge documents to gain control of their assets, and even dispose of their bodies in ways that turned a further profit. Yet, despite the increasing number of disappearances, Holmes's charm and the chaotic environment of the fair allowed him to evade suspicion. Holmes's downfall began not with his murders, but with a series of increasingly reckless financial schemes. His undoing came in 1894 when he involved himself in a complex insurance scam with his associate, Benjamin Pitezel. The plan was for Pitezel to fake his own death so Holmes could collect the insurance money. But in typical fashion, Holmes murdered Pitezel instead. To cover his tracks, Holmes then murdered 3 of Pitazel's children, leading investigators on a nationwide chase. His crimes began to unravel, and by November 1894, Holmes was arrested in Boston for insurance fraud. However, as investigators delved deeper, they uncovered the grisly reality of his crimes. The murder castle was a house of horrors. Investigators found rooms filled with surgical tables, torture devices, and vats of acid used to dispose of bodies. Holmes was eventually charged with multiple counts of murder, though the true number of his victims remains unknown to this day. Holmes's trial captivated the nation. He showed little remorse, even as he confessed to 27 murders, though it's believed he could have killed far more. On May 7, 1896, HH Holmes was executed by hanging in Philadelphia, ending the life of one of America's most notorious criminals. The story of H.H. Holmes did not end with his death. The legend of the murder castle has persisted for over a century, a grim reminder of the evil that can lurk behind a mask of civility. Although the building was eventually demolished, its legacy lives on in books, films, and the nightmares of those who hear its story. Holmes is often considered America's first serial killer, a title that underscores the unprecedented nature of his crimes. His ability to blend into society while committing unspeakable acts has fascinated criminologists and historians alike. He was a man who exploited the rapid changes of his time, urbanization, anonymity, and the allure of the big city to create a world where he could kill with impunity. As we look back on the life and crimes of H.H. Holmes, we are reminded of the darkness that can reside within the human soul. His story serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that the face of evil is not always monstrous. Sometimes it is the face of a charming man offering a room for rent. Imagine a windswept prairie, stretching endlessly under a vast, cloudless sky. The year is 1870, and the frontier of Kansas is a land of opportunity, a wild, untamed region where the promise of prosperity lured settlers from across the nation. But this vast openness, so full of potential, also concealed a terrifying secret. Hidden among the innocuous homesteads was a family whose name would become synonymous with horror: the Bloody Benders. The Bender family consisted of John Sr., a stoic and intimidating figure; Elvira, his wife, with a harsh and unfriendly demeanor; John Jr., their awkward and unsettling son; and Kate, the young, beautiful daughter who claimed to possess supernatural powers. Together, they presented themselves as ordinary pioneers, but behind their facade was a darkness that would leave a bloody stain on the history of the American frontier. Kansas, at the time, was a place where law was thin and justice was often delivered at the end of a gun barrel. It was a land where people vanished without a trace, where the isolation and lawlessness created the perfect conditions for the Benders to carry out their gruesome deeds. Their story is not just a tale of murder, but a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the most unexpected places. The origins of the Bender family are clouded in mystery, with conflicting accounts of their past. It's believed that John Sr., whose real name might have been John Flickinger, was originally from Germany or the Netherlands, having emigrated to the United States before settling in Kansas. Elvira, also known as Almira Make, was rumored to have been married multiple times before, with some suggesting that she had killed several of her previous husbands. In 1870, the Benders arrived in Labette County, Kansas, and claimed a 160-acre plot of land under the Homestead Act. Their cabin was located along the Osage Trail, a route frequented by pioneers traveling westward. The Bender homestead, modest in appearance, included a small barn and garden, where they grew vegetables and tended a few animals. The cabin itself was divided into two sections. The front half served as a general store and inn, while the rear was the family's living quarters. The Benders quickly became known in the area, but they were regarded as an odd and reclusive family. John Sr. and John Jr. were seldom seen interacting with others, and when they did, their heavy German accents and strange behavior made them stand out. Elvira was particularly feared for her aggressive demeanor and was rumored to be involved in witchcraft. In contrast, Kate, who spoke English fluently and was known for her beauty and charm, was the most social member of the family, often engaging with visitors and offering her services as a spiritualist. The Benders were cunning in their selection of victims. They targeted travelers who were alone, especially those who appeared wealthy or were carrying valuable items. Kate played a pivotal role in luring these unsuspecting victims to their doom. She often advertised herself as a healer and spiritualist, promising to cure ailments or communicate with the dead. Her charm and allure drew in men, while her claims of spiritual powers attracted those in search of solace or answers. Once inside the Bender cabin, the trap was laid. The victim would be invited to sit at the head of the dining table, which was positioned near a canvas curtain that separated the front of the cabin from the back. As the guest enjoyed a meal or engaged in conversation with Kate, one of the Bender men would take position behind the curtain. At the right moment, they would strike the victim on the back of the head with a hammer, delivering a fatal blow. After the victim was incapacitated or killed, the family would drag the body to the trapdoor in the floor, which led to a small cellar beneath the cabin. There, the victim's throat was slit to ensure death, and the body was stripped of valuables. The remains were then buried in shallow graves in the orchard behind the cabin, their resting places marked only by the hastily turned soil. Over time, the orchard became a graveyard, its once fertile ground turned into a chilling testament to the Benders' brutality. By 1872, the disappearances of travelers on the Osage Trail were becoming too frequent to ignore. Concerned families and friends began to report the missing individuals to local authorities, who were slow to react, given the transient nature of the region's population. However, when Dr. William York, a well-known and respected physician, vanished while traveling from Fort Scott to Independence, the situation escalated. Dr. York's brothers, Colonel Ed York and Alexander York, were determined to find out what had happened. Colonel York, leading a group of armed men, retraced his brother's steps, visiting every homestead along the way. When they arrived at the Bender cabin in March 1873, the family was polite but evasive. Kate, ever the performer, offered to use her spiritual powers to help locate Dr. York, though her offer was met with skepticism. The Benders claimed they had seen Dr. York, but insisted he had continued on his journey. Despite the Benders' assurances, Colonel York remained suspicious. He returned to the Bender cabin a few weeks later, this time with a larger group of men. When questioned about other missing travelers, Elvira became enraged, accusing York of insulting her and her family. This reaction only fueled York's suspicions. Shortly afterward, the community organized a meeting at the nearby Harmony Grove schoolhouse, where it was decided that each homestead would be searched for evidence of the missing travelers. Before the search could commence, the Benders disappeared. Neighbors who visited the homestead found it deserted. The animals were unfed, the cabin empty, and the family nowhere to be found. The disappearance was too sudden, too complete, to be a coincidence. A search party was quickly formed, and when they arrived at the Bender property, they made a horrifying discovery. The search party began digging in the orchard behind the cabin, where they uncovered the shallow graves of multiple victims. The first body found was that of Dr. William York, his skull crushed and his throat slit. As they continued to dig, more bodies were found, each one bearing the same brutal injuries. In total, at least a dozen bodies were recovered, though some reports suggest there may have been as many as 21 victims. The Bender homestead, once a place of refuge for weary travelers, had become a site of unimaginable horror. The news of the Bender family's crimes spread rapidly, inciting outrage and fear across the region. The authorities, along with numerous vigilante groups, launched an intense manhunt to capture the Benders, but their efforts were in vain. The family had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only the grisly evidence of their deeds. Search parties scoured the countryside, following every lead, but the Benders seemed to have vanished into thin air. As frustration mounted, so did the desire for retribution. The lawless nature of the frontier meant that many took justice into their own hands. Several innocent people, mistaken for members of the Bender family, were captured and lynched by angry mobs. However, these acts of vigilante justice did little to bring the real culprits to justice, and the whereabouts of the Bender family remained a mystery. Over the years, numerous sightings of individuals believed to be the Benders were reported in various parts of the country. Some claimed to have seen them in Texas, others in New Mexico, and there were even reports of them living under new identities in the East. In 1884, 2 women were arrested in Michigan on suspicion of being Kate and Elvira Bender, but they were released after a lack of evidence and conflicting testimonies. The Benders had become a ghostly presence, a symbol of the dangers of the frontier, forever haunting the American psyche. However, later came more mystery surrounding Katie's true identity, casts a long shadow over her legacy. Many wonder if she might have been the same Katie Bender who fled Kansas after the gruesome murders attributed to the infamous Bender family. Both women shared striking similarities. Born the same year, with auburn hair, hazel eyes, and a scarred left eye, married to reclusive German blacksmiths named John. The connection between her life in Kansas and her rise to prominence in Colorado remains speculative, though intriguing. Some believe Katie and John may have used their common surname to blend into the German immigrant community, hiding in plain sight while leaving behind a trail of blood in Kansas. Yet, there is little concrete evidence linking Colorado's Katie to the crimes. Instead, her life in Glenwood Springs was marked by public success and personal generosity, as she gave generously to her family and supported causes dedicated to family welfare. Could this have been a clever cover-up, a life built on the ruins of a dark past? Or was Katie simply a hard-working immigrant woman who overcame hardship to build a prosperous life in the American West? The truth, like Katie herself, remains elusive, leaving behind more questions than answers. The discovery of the Benders' crimes sent shockwaves through the community of Labette County. The once peaceful and close-knit society was now torn apart by fear and suspicion. Neighbors who had once trusted each other now looked with suspicion, wondering if the Benders had acted alone or if there were others like them still hiding in the community. The Bender homestead, once a place of hospitality for weary travelers, became a site of horror, abandoned and avoided by all. It stood as a grim reminder of the evil that had lurked in their midst. The land itself seemed tainted, as if the blood of the victims had seeped into the very soil, leaving behind a stain that could never be washed away. Some papers speculated that the Benders were part of a larger criminal network involved in everything from robbery to human trafficking. Others suggested that they were driven by a twisted sense of morality or religious fervor. The truth, however, was much simpler and more terrifying. The Benders were opportunists who saw in the isolation of the frontier a chance to satisfy their greed and cruelty. Over time, the story of the Bloody Benders entered American folklore. The family's cabin, long since destroyed, became a site of macabre fascination. Legends grew around the Benders, painting them as almost supernatural figures, agents of evil who preyed on the innocent. Their story has been the subject of countless books, documentaries, and even films, each one adding its own interpretation to the tale. Stories of haunted roads and ghostly apparitions near the old Bender property became part of the local lore, adding another layer to the chilling legacy of the Bloody Benders.